Hello, good morning, good afternoon to all our attendees here. This is a very special event that AFI is hosting titled the MSME Recovery from the COVID-19 Pandemic, an African Member's Perspective. Now from the title, you can see that this is an exclusive event only for our members from the Sub-Saharan Africa region. So we thank you for taking the time to hear us today, and we have a very exciting lineup in store for you. My name is Tati, and I will be your MC for today. Now, before we begin, please let me go through some housekeeping rules for you. The participant's audio is on mute. However, should you want to ask a question anytime throughout the event, you may use the raise hand feature, and we will indicate when it is time for you to speak. Your videos are also turned off automatically to allow for less interruption in the connection. However, we would love to see you today, and please turn it on your video should your connection allows. We have a chat feature here that you can interact with other members of the meeting. And for today interpretation, we have it in Portuguese as well as French. And you may select your desired language from the menu below. So lastly, click on the view button at the top right corner and select gallery should you want to see all the speakers together on the screen. Before we move on with today's agenda, may I invite my colleague, Mr. Efwe Kodaje from the Africa Regional Office to provide opening remarks. Efwe, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Tati. Can you hear me correctly?
Very well.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for this. Members, dear members, panelists from the AFRI member institutions, from the Bank of Uganda, Bank of Namibia, the Central Bank of West African State, BCAO, Bank of Zambia, Bank of Ghana, panelists from AFI private sector partners from Visa and Vodacom, delegates from AFI member institution and private sector partners institutions, dear AFI colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to you to this event on technical discussion and public-private dialogue on MSME recovery from COVID-19 African perspective. On behalf of the AFI's Regional Office for Africa, I'd like to welcome you and to thank you for joining this event on knowledge exchange and dialogue. As you are aware, the African Financial Inclusion Policy Initiative, AFPI, provides a platform for policymakers in Africa to, among other things, share knowledge and expertise over a wide spectrum of topics with the aim of increasing access to and usage of quality financial services. While peer learning has greatly benefited AFI member institutions, interaction with private sector partners under the public-private dialogue helps establish the connection between the policy and the industry. In this context, the dialogue between our PPG partner and policymaker from Africa brings to the fore ways in which we can increase access to finance for vulnerable groups who include women, SMEs, young people, and forcibly displaced persons. Nearly 2 years into the COVID-19 pandemic, Africa, like the rest of the world, has been adversely affected by the global pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic affected SMEs in Africa in various dimensions and sectors, including agriculture, wholesale and retail trade, manufacturing, administrative services, and so on. Many African countries predict a significant decline in economic activities. Are you hearing me? Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, FOA. We can hear you.
It's clear?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Many African countries predict a significant decline in economic activities with growth forecast halved. MSME led or owned by women have been particularly hardly hit, with many reporting revenue losses of more than 50%. Financial regulator and policymakers in Africa have taken all the necessary action to mitigate the impacts from various angles. About 50% of AFI member policy response are currently focused on improving MSME access to credit using digital financial services. MSME recovery is also one of the priority topics of AFI private sector partners in Africa and beyond. They implemented a variety of support measures, ranging from the digitization of basic SME operation, creation of portal to enable SMEs to go digital and connect with larger business partners, as well as the launch of more comprehensive program and solution to enable SME to drive efficiency and sales. This session, the session of today, will be divided into two. The first one is a technical one. AFI member will discuss MSME recovery from the COVID pandemic from the African member perspective. During the second session, AFI member jointly with the private sector partners, Vodacom and Visa, will have thoughtful deliberation about practical private collaboration, public-private collaboration to effectively support MSME recovery in Africa. So the objective of this session are then first to discuss and share experiences on the also to focus on recovering interventions, regulatory and market solution. Is also to highlight the specific gender and youth deliberation for SME and green recovery measure. We also want to identify trends and public and private solutions to support MSME recovery in Africa. We hope that this session will provide you with adequate ideas to further your ongoing initiative in your jurisdiction. Please reach out to the African Regional Office in case you need any further detail, and we will be happy to facilitate interaction to ensure that you take the learning forward. We look forward to continue working closely with you to advance the implementation of smart policy to extend inclusion financial services, serving the vulnerable people, especially the women, the young, and the SMEs. I thank you, and I wish you all the fruitful deliberation. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much, FOA, for providing the opening remarks for our event today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as FOA has alluded to, our event today is split into two parts. The first part is a technical discussion, a presentation by members of AFI in the African region. So as per the agenda that you see here on the screen, we will take about 50 minutes for this session. And I am very happy to introduce the moderator for that session, Ms. Aban Haq, the project lead of BFS Champions at the Alliance for Financial Inclusion. Aban, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Tati. And I am very grateful to FOI for providing such direct on the mark opening remarks, because I think they provide a very good context in which we will be having this first technical session. FOI highlighted that, for the past 2 years, countries have been struggling with dealing with a surprise catastrophe which affected everybody. But now policymakers and governments are preparing for what comes after COVID. How do we help sectors, industries, and population segments which have been adversely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic? And also how we can build more resilient economies and more resilient MSME sectors. So in this session today, that is what we will be focusing on. In the next 50 minutes, we will try to answer at least 3 key questions in this context. Firstly, so we will be hearing from 3 AFI members, and through their presentations, they will try to answer questions around what is the current condition of MSMEs in their jurisdictions at this stage after having gone through a prolonged COVID-19 pandemic and its implications on economies. Secondly, what are the regulatory and policy interventions that they are looking towards to support the MSME recovery? And thirdly, we will also try to delve into priority sectors in the economy which have been significantly hit. Some countries, for example, the tourism sectors have been more severely hit than some of the other sectors, and also the disadvantaged segments. So women-led businesses, as FOI mentioned, have been also quite seriously hit. So we will try to look at these segments and priority sectors as well. Let me share with you the format of this session. So as you can see on screen, we have 3 distinguished speakers from AFI, amongst AFI members. Each presenter will have 10 to 15 minutes for their intervention. So I will invite them one by one to make their intervention. And after that, we will open up for question and answers from the audience. We will try to keep this interactive. So even as the speakers are presenting, if you have any questions or you would even like to share your own country's experience or policy priorities, please feel free to type those in the chat, and we will keep track of those and pose your questions and introduce your comments to the discussion after the 3 speakers have made their presentations. Just to remind you, translation is available in French and Portuguese. If you are having any problems accessing that, please type in chat and our team will try to help you resolve any issues you're facing. So without further delay, let me invite our first speaker. We are very honored to have with us Mr. Alex Luanja, who is the Deputy Director, Agriculture Credit Facility Division at the Bank of Uganda. Alex is also responsible as chairperson for Project Managers Forum for the Government of Uganda IT projects. So let me hand over the floor to Alex to share with us the Uganda perspective on MSME recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. I would also like to remind all the speakers to speak slowly so that our interpreters are able to follow you and can make adequate translation, and also to stick to time so we have some space at the end for question and answers. So with that, let me hand over to Alex, and Alex, we will run your slides now.
Thank you, Aban, for that kind introduction and for giving me the opportunity to interact with members of the FI. First of all, these slides are intimidatingly many, but they are not many. And I'll try to navigate to make it a point that I leave within the 15 minutes. This discussion is going to be guided by the introduction, definition of MSMEs, Uganda's perspective, SME statistics, current condition of MSMEs in Uganda, practical policy guidance on MSMEs recovery in the FI's policy model, and Uganda's regulatory and policy intervention to support the recovery of MSMEs COVID-19 pandemic. And then I will also talk about Uganda's specific policy measures for women and youth-led MSMEs, and innovations and digitalization for MSMEs finance. we cannot afford directly to forget, because we are still in it. We need to remember that actually in December 2019, the coronavirus pandemic was reported in Wuhan city, and governments all over the world, including Uganda, instituted strict local measures, the lockdown measures, including quarantine, to curb the spread of the virus. Many businesses, you may remember, and I know you know it, including the MSMEs, have since experienced a reduction in their operations, in their profitability due to COVID-19 pandemic. In Uganda, the Ministry of Finance has hinted that the GDP growth rate could decline by 7 to 10%, and around 2 to 3 million both formal and informal jobs could be lost during the financial year 2020-2021 and 2021-2022. First of all, I needed to share with you what the definition of MSMEs in Uganda's perspective. An enterprise that employs 1 to 4 people and with a turnover and asset base of 1 to 12 million is regarded as a micro enterprise. And the one regarded as small is that enterprise that employs 5 to 20 people and has a turnover of total and asset base of 12 to 100 million Uganda shillings. A medium enterprise is that one that employs around 50 to 100 people and has got a turnover and asset base of around 100 to 300 million Uganda shillings. Yeah, the MSM statistics, Uganda has approximately 1,500,000 MSMEs. And this is according to Uganda Bureau of Statistics. Most of these SMEs account for 90% of the total enterprises in Uganda, and they contribute 80% of Uganda's GDP. These MSMEs employ around 2.5 million Uganda's workforce. Next slide, please. Yeah, right now, the current condition of MSMEs in Uganda, like in the introductory remarks, you heard that the tourism, manufacturing, and other sectors were worst hit. And according to Uganda, around 82% of the SMEs experienced a reduction in sales of more than 50%. And about 64% of the SMEs are operating below 50% capacity. Approximately 92% of these MSMEs posted losses during the period. And 70% of the MSMEs have laid off more than 50% of their staff. Many of these enterprises are constrained by limited financial resources, and about 12% of these MSMEs ceased operations. Yeah, that notwithstanding, domestic investment picked up during the last quarter of 2020, in line with the global investment recovery. Manufacturing and construction recovered during the quarter ended March 2021. The economic growth outlook, what we see that will come in face of us by 2022 is that the economic growth outlook will be 4.6% and expected to accelerate to 6.4% in the fiscal year 2023. In order to sustain the economic recovery, the government is not resting. It is trying to manage the emerging risks, including the widening of fiscal deficits, escalating costs of medium, smaller enterprises, businesses, and the climate shocks. But remember, this is a two-way model. As we embark on economic recovery, we cannot forget about the lives of our people. So the government of Uganda remains committed to saving lives by intensifying measures that limit the spread of COVID-19 virus. Next slide, please. Yeah, the practical policy guidance we have under the physical, we have physical packages, monetary and macro-financial, structural policies, exchange rate and balance of payments. And the government of Uganda has tried to do something along these lines. Next slide, please. Yeah, under physical packages, the government of the Republic of Uganda offered some tax relief measures. For example, the government deferred the payment of pay-as-you-earn, corporation tax, and presumptive tax to small and medium-sized enterprises, respectively. So they had to be given a grace period that would allow them to plow back that money. There would be tax that would have been paid immediately, but the government said, no, we can stagger this. Let's give you a grace period, hold it, and then plow back. That was an incentive that really helped the SMEs. The government also reduced the charges on mobile money and mobile banking transactions. They were drastically reduced, and this was in line of enhancing and pulling out the SMEs from the ditch that they were in at that time. The government, through Bank of Uganda, did also do something under monetary and macro financial. For example, the central bank rate, the CBR, was reduced by 200 basis points from 9% in March 2020 to 7% in June 2020. And I'm happy to report to you that currently the CBR is at 6.5%. In addition to that, government of Uganda has got what we call agricultural credit facility. This is a facility that is given to farmers and all those involved in agro-processing, mechanization, but in the line of agriculture sector. This facility is lent to the farmers at 12% per annum and can go to up to an amount of 1.5 billion per single borrower, and it can be lifted by case basis. The reasoning behind this is that we wanted, because we know that most of the SMEs are deeply involved in agriculture, and agriculture being the backbone of Uganda's economy. So that's why, in its wisdom, the government decided to offer a cheaper avenue of finance to farmers at 12%. This is much lower compared to the banking sector in the country. And the government also has introduced what we call Small Business Recovery Fund. This is meant to support the SMEs and small businesses that were worst hit by the COVID-19. This money, the government has started with 200 billion, which is going to be lent to the SMEs at 12% per annum. And the good thing in this is that this money is mostly focusing the vulnerable groups, the youth and the women-led enterprises who don't have collateral. And you can borrow this money without the conventional collateral required by the commercial banks, but provided your cash flows, your integrity can support you, you can always access this money. And the government also went ahead to provide around 94 billion to macro and small scale enterprises through circles and through microfinance institutions. So you find that SMEs have been in position to go and borrow this money at relatively affordable interest rates, and they have been in position to revamp their operations. Much as they have not reached their full capacity, they are promising so. We are in that line of recovery. So the government has gone also further to provide around 1,045 billion to Uganda Development Bank to offer low interest loans to manufacturers, agribusiness, and other firms. And we know that the pandemic left the medium, small enterprises in a terrible situation, to the extent that most of their profits were drained, and they could not be in a position to service their loans. The government, through Bank of Uganda, decided to offer a grace period, and they allowed the running loans to be restructured. So around 3 to 6 months were given to the enterprises, especially the small, medium enterprises, to ensure that they recover, because the objective was not to make this organization phase out, but as the country, we needed to support them. And we know that actually the SMEs are the economic movers of any nation.
Alex,
Next.
just to give you a flash, time is running out. So if you could maybe just focus on some points, and then we can come back to others during the Q&A. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, thank you. Let me rush. Under the structural policies, you see what the bank has done. We have encouraged use of Visa cards at point of sale, bank at wallet, and we have also something important here is that the National Payment System was enacted. The National System Act was enacted in September 2020, and the regulatory framework for licensing and monitoring payment service providers was also put in place. The government, as usual, through Bank of Uganda, intervened in the foreign exchange market to smoothen out excess volatility arising from the financial markets. And something important to note here is that the government encouraged the import substitution strategy, the one we named Buy Uganda, Build Uganda. This strategy has reduced foreign exchange outflow. Next slide, as I run through. Yeah, additional measures. There was a seed capital of 256 billion, which is available for the Youth and Women Entrepreneurship Fund and the Yoga Fund, so they can easily borrow that money to do their businesses. And the government also had some areas which was owed to domestic farms that the 673 was paid. The government has also introduced the Small Business Recovery Fund of 200 billion to be lent to the small business firms, the MSMEs, and we continuously encourage the SMEs to embrace digital platforms for financial transactions. Next slide. Yeah, all these things have been talked about the city capital, the 256, the youth circles, making come into groups, and then the agricultural equity facility at 12%, and borrowing up to a tune of 2.1 billion, and introduction of the Small Business Recovery Fund of 200 billion. Definitely, this was geared and meant to help the youth and the women entrepreneurs in the country. Next slide. That notwithstanding, as far as digitization is concerned, we have encouraged the MSMEs to embrace internet banking, digital payment solutions like mobile money, digital marketing through WhatsApp, Zoom, Facebook, and Instagram. Around 12.5% have already transitioned to remote working through Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and all the like. Next slide. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate that the government of Uganda has really done enough in addressing the predicament of MSMEs. But then that's not enough, because the SMEs have not fully recovered. So we still urge the government and the private sector to continue working together to ensure that the MSMEs harness the opportunities available for post-economic recovery. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. I think that was such an excellent overview of all the measures being taken. It was really, I think there's a lot to learn from Uganda's response, and I especially appreciate the targeted approach in terms of making sure that different sectors which are affected are helped through schemes directed at the agriculture sector, small businesses, young entrepreneurs, as well as women entrepreneurs. So I think there would be much interest amongst our audience to get into more details on that. And so if any of you would like to learn more, please do type in the chat. And I think the point about the private partnerships and role of the private sector would lead us very nicely into our second session. But before that, let me welcome Dr. Emma Hayambo, who is the Director of Strategic Communications and Financial Sector Development at the Bank of Namibia. She has spent over 21 years in central banking environment, and she considers herself a development finance whisperer. She coordinated the development of her 10-year financial sector strategy, and she's also coordinated the development of the SME financing strategy that is being implemented currently in her country as part of the financial inclusion agenda. So who can be better than Dr. Emma to share with us what is the Bank of Namibia's approach to MSME recovery from COVID-19. Dr. Emma, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Aban, for such an introduction. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever we are. My outline is that I'm going to look at the impact of COVID-19 on the Namibian economy, what the response has been from the government side, from the public sector, basically, including the central bank, and then some other initiatives in the pipeline, and then I will conclude. Next slide, please. So Namibia was really hard hit, especially by the third wave of COVID-19, and that happened during the period July to September 2021. But we have since seen the numbers reducing significantly, as you can see from that chart. Next slide. So the impact of the COVID-19 then has really been felt mostly in terms of loss of employment. There has been a lot of retrenchments in Namibia. And as you can see, in 2020, there was a total of 12,238 employees retrenched. And in 2021, between the period January and June, which is the latest information that I have, there have been a retrenchment of a total of 1,444. I must mention that while most of it was really due to COVID impact, when COVID came, Namibia was actually already experiencing a recession, and you can imagine when COVID came on board, what that should have meant. And although I don't have specific a breakdown in terms of the SME retrenchments, because that is really, data is really the area that we need to improve on as a country, we know that the SMEs were greatly affected by the pandemic. Next slide. So in terms of sectoral impact, the impact was mostly felt within the hospitality sector, which is the tourism sector, followed by the wholesale and retail, and then the mining and caring sector, but also then the other sectors that are not listed there. Next slide. So we have since had business closure. About 1,700 businesses have closed since 2019. As I said, I'm looking back before the outbreak of COVID, because As I said, we had been in a recession already when COVID came. So out of the 1,700 businesses that have been closed, 40% of that was in 2019, 33% of that was in 2020, and 27% was in 2021. And the closures were mainly again observed in the tourism, construction, wholesale, and retail, and real estate sectors. So it was a combination of economic scaring from the past recessions and also the impact of COVID. Next slide. So what have we done as a country to mitigate the impact of COVID? I think, and I must really thank my government that they acted swiftly. What they have done from the government side was to introduce a fiscal stimulus of 8.3 billion Namibian dollars, and you can divide that by 15, an exchange rate of 15 to the US dollar. So what has happened there is that they extended grants, we called it a basic income grant, to the unemployed and also to those falling below a certain threshold in terms of income. The Bank of Namibia also came in, and we introduced relief measures, mostly aimed at loan restructuring, but also repayment holidays. But we also then decided during that period that we were going to reduce the repo rate, and we reduced to a combined 275 basis points since March 2020. Then the central bank also introduced an SME COVID-19 scheme. In fact, this was done in partnership with the government and the banking institutions. So basically what then happened is that the Bank of Namibia availed the funds. The commercial banks would then disburse the funds or extend loans, and then the government guaranteed the loans. Other public entities, especially the development finance institutions such as the Development Bank of Namibia and Agricultural Bank of Namibia, also introduced initiatives. The DBN introduced a loan guarantee scheme facility for the period 3 to 6 months. There was already also an SME loan guarantee scheme being administered by the Development Bank. That also then was ongoing. And then there was a loan restructure and repayment holidays that was provided by both the Development Bank and the Agricultural Bank. Next slide. So just to provide some details in terms of the various initiatives. In terms of the COVID-19 policy relief measures, this came in the form of introducing what we called Bid 33. Basically, then there was a component on credit policy measures where the loan repayment moratorium was extended, or rather the period was for 6 to 24 months. But as I'm speaking now, we have actually, the central bank has extended that period to 36 months. So there were then other principles in terms of the borrower not to be worse off, and then also writing off of loans in the loss category, extended to 3 years to allow for longer recovery period. In terms of liquidity, the maturity mismatches for businesses, as usual, were relaxed to 0 to 7 day outflows. Initially, may exceed inflows by amount equivalent to unencumbered liquid asset surpluses. 8 to 31 days, where the board of respective boards of the commercial banks can then decide their own limits based on liquidity needs. Then there was also a capital conservation buffer where domestic systemically important banks, for instance, had to reduce to zero. That had to reduce to zero so that we support credit extension to boost the economy. Then the single borrower limit was also one of those aspects that we looked at. That was reduced from 30% to 25%, again, to ensure that borrowers are able to obtain more credit. Next slide, please. With
Dr.
regards
Emma,
to
sorry,
the SME COVID,
just to intervene to alert you on the time, yeah? So if you could
Okay.
wrap up in 3 minutes, thank you.
Okay. So with regards to SME COVID-19 loan scheme, the details really is that it was a scheme amounting to 500 million Namibian dollars. And again, the exchange rate to the dollar is 15. It was aimed at providing working capital for businesses, for SMEs that are negatively affected by COVID. Smart partnerships between the central bank, the Ministry of Finance, commercial banks, as I indicated earlier. It was only open to SMEs with revenue below 60 million Namibian dollars, and those should have had good credit standing pre-COVID. And then there was a grace period of 6 months and a 5-year repayment period. And borrowing was actually at prime lending rate. Next slide. Other initiatives that were that are actually in the pipeline to support SMEs, the SME financing strategy that has been put in place by the government, and that was actually before COVID even hit. So in terms of that strategy, it was to look at a lack of collateral that has always been an issue for SMEs. For that, we introduced a credit guarantee scheme. And then there has been also an issue of saying that there are SMEs that are not looking necessarily for loans, but they need equity. And for those ones, we introduced a venture capital fund. And then also, we identified that the SMEs were actually lacking in terms of capacity to handle their businesses, and we introduced what we call a mentoring and coaching program. Next slide. So other initiatives around innovation and digitalization that we are looking at to help us cope with the post-COVID environment. The bank is working on a fintech regulatory framework, and then the central bank is also conducting research on the feasibility and potential benefits of introducing a central bank digital currency. So these are initiatives that we are looking at currently. So in conclusion then, next slide. The Namibian economy and the SME sector in particular has been hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. The negative impact was felt in job losses and closure of businesses, mainly SMEs. Government of the Republic responded swiftly, both in containing the spread of the virus, as well as investing in economic recovery. So the full rollout of initiatives, such as the relief measures, the SME COVID-19 loan guarantee scheme, the SME financing strategy, will greatly contribute to the recovery of the SME sector and the economy as a whole going forward. So other initiatives, such as the implementation of the fintech regulatory framework that I was talking about, will also then unlock the funding models for SMEs and enhance financial inclusion. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Emma. That was very insightful and especially interesting to note on what is coming and what is planned around interventions in innovation and digitization. I hope we have some time in today's meeting to get into those in more detail. But without any delay, as we are slightly behind time, I will invite our third and last, but definitely not the least, speaker of this session, Mr. Kofi Tozoro. He's the head of Economics Financing Department at the Central Bank of West African State, BCAO. He has 14 years of experience at the bank, mainly as a macroprudential supervisor. He leads a team responsible for promoting action in favor of financing of economies in the region, including SME financing policies. So, Mr. Kofi, let me invite you to take the floor, please. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Aban. Thank you, Aban. Because of my poor English, I think I will I'll go in French. Et donc, je voulais remercier déjà l'AFI pour l'invitation et cette invitation qui nous permet de partager les mesures prises au niveau de la Banque centrale, au niveau de l'UMOA pour faire face donc à cette crise qui a affecté tous les pays. Donc, notre présentation sera autour de 4 points. Nous parlerons dans un premier temps de l'état des lieux des PME dans notre zone. Ensuite, les mesures qui ont été prises pour soutenir les différentes entreprises ou l'économie dans la période de la pandémie. Et nous parlerons également de quelques innovations d'un point de vue numérique qui contribuent ou qui ont contribué au financement des MPME dans notre zone. Et enfin, nous parlerons des mesures spécifiques qui concernent les MPME dirigés par les femmes et les jeunes. Next slide. OK. Comme nous l'avons vu dans la plupart des différentes présentations, les PME occupent une place importante dans nos économies, dans le monde entier et aussi au niveau de l'IMOA. Les PME représentent entre 80 et 95% des entreprises privées dans notre zone. Mais ces PME sont des pourvoyeurs d'emplois dans nos pays. Au Sénégal, par exemple, elles contribuent à hauteur de 42% des emplois modernes. En Côte d'Ivoire, plus de 23% des emplois modernes. Et malheureusement, ce qu'on constate, c'est que leur contribution au financement de l'économie, à la création de la richesse notamment, demeure limitée. Donc, on peut noter 33% au Sénégal et 20% en Côte d'Ivoire. Next slide. Alors ici, sur cette graphique, nous voyons en ligne bleue la part des financements au MPME qui est inférieure à 15% des crédits octroyés par le secteur bancaire. Donc, cette part est faible. Et ce que le graphique nous montre qui est encore intéressant, c'est la ligne, la courbe en rouge, qui est représentée par les prêts non performants. Donc, la dégradation du portefeuille des crédits. Et ce qu'on peut noter, c'est que chaque fois qu'il y a une augmentation des prêts non performants, on retrouve le crédit au MPME qui est également en baisse. Ceci nous montre que si nous voulons accroître ou si nous voulons maintenir un bon financement des MPME dans notre zone, il faut que nous agissions également sur la qualité de la signature de ces MPME. Donc, ceci va justifier plus ou moins les différentes mesures qui ont été prises rapidement face à la COVID, qui ont été prises dans notre zone. Donc, on voit que ici, la part des PME, des crédits aux PME représente environ 14% dans notre zone sur toute la période considérée. Et COVID a affecté plus ou moins les activités des PME. Donc, comme vous le savez, dans la plupart des pays, cette pandémie a induit plutôt des activités, de la réduction des activités, le confinement, la fermeture des restaurants, des hôtels, ainsi de suite, la fermeture des frontières. Et tout ceci a affecté principalement des secteurs comme l'hôtellerie, la restauration, les services de divertissement, le transport et les commerces spécialisés. Donc, ces entreprises ont été fortement impactées. Et donc, comme on le sait, si les prêts ou la qualité du portefeuille de ces entreprises prend un coup, le crédit suit également, alors les différentes mesures ont été prises, next slide, les différentes mesures ont été prises par nos différentes institutions, nos autorités de l'UMOA pour pouvoir faire face donc à la dégradation de la qualité du portefeuille de ces entités. Next. OK. Au titre des mesures qui ont été prises dans notre zone, je parlerai d'abord des mesures qui ont été prises par les autorités publiques. Ensuite, je parlerai des mesures qui ont été prises par la BCAO. Les autorités publiques ont agi principalement sur la variable taxe, dans la variable impôt. Donc, pour accompagner donc les MPME et éviter les licenciements qu'on a notés, par exemple, dans le cas de la Namibie, les gouvernements ont pris des décisions pour accompagner donc ces entreprises. Donc, ces décisions ont concerné la suspension des contrôles fiscaux pour une période déterminée en fonction des États, le report de paiement des taxes forfaitaires pour les petits commerçants et des artisans, la remise même d'impôts pour les secteurs tels que le transport et les industries ainsi que le tourisme. On a vu dans certains pays, par exemple, les gouvernements ont demandé aux entreprises de maintenir les emplois sous condition donc de réduction de certains impôts. Et donc, chaque entreprise qui décide de maintenir l'emploi malgré la réduction de leur activité à son personnel bénéficie des allègements fiscaux auprès de leur gouvernement. Et donc, ça a été vraiment salutaire et ça a permis d'empêcher un taux élevé donc de licenciement pendant cette période. Or, les États ont proposé également comme mesure l'apurement de la dette intérieure. Donc, l'État s'est engagé, la plupart des États se sont engagés à rembourser la dette intérieure pour permettre à ces PME, à ces entreprises d'avoir beaucoup plus d'assises et de pouvoir maintenir leur activité à flot. Donc, voilà quelques mesures qui ont été prises par les autorités publiques. Maintenant, au niveau de la BCAO, au niveau de la Banque centrale, dès le mois de mars, la Banque centrale a anticipé les effets de la COVID sur les secteurs productifs, en particulier les MPME, en prenant des mesures. Et plusieurs mesures ont été prises. Il y a des mesures du type politique monétaire, mais il y a des mesures également qui allègent la situation des établissements de crédit et leur permettent de pouvoir continuer à financer l'économie, à accompagner donc les PME dans ces situations. On a par exemple au titre des mesures de type politique monétaire, on a l'organisation d'adjudication sur les guichets d'appel d'offres à un taux fixe de 2,5 qui est le taux le plus faible pour les guichets de refinancement de notre zone. La Banque centrale s'est engagée également à couvrir la totalité des besoins de liquidité exprimés par les banques à moindre coût. On a noté une deuxième mesure, c'est la réduction de 50 points de base des taux directeurs, notamment le taux minimum des appels d'offres à 2% à compter du 24 juin pour soutenir donc la dynamique de relance économique de la zone. La Banque centrale a pris une mesure également d'élargir les titres admissibles à ces guichets de refinancement à des entreprises qui sont notées A et B. Et donc, ceci a permis aux banques également de venir au guichet de refinancement et de disposer des fonds nécessaires pour donc accompagner le financement des PME. Une des mesures phares que la Banque centrale a prises concerne le report d'échéance sur les prêts des entreprises impactées par la crise. Et cette mesure a été très importante parce qu'elle a permis d'éviter donc que les PME ou les entreprises en général puissent connaître des défauts, et ces défauts allaient peut-être réduire leur accès aux services financiers et à éviter donc que ces entreprises-là continuent de pouvoir financer l'économie. Donc, cette mesure a été de reporter les échéances qui sont échues pendant cette période, et beaucoup d'entreprises ont bénéficié de cette mesure. Cette mesure a été élargie plus tard au secteur de la microfinance, et c'est vraiment une mesure phare. Next slide. Next slide, please. Alors, cette mesure dont je viens de parler tout à l'heure concernant le report d'échéance a eu comme impact en décembre 2020, on a plus de 11 700 entreprises, agents économiques qui ont bénéficié donc de ces mesures. Et dans ce nombre d'agents économiques, nous avons plus de 2671 entreprises qui sont principalement, comme on l'a dit, des entreprises de MPME qui représentent plus de 80 à 95% de ces entreprises. Donc, 2671 entreprises qui ont bénéficié de cette mesure de report d'échéance. Et également, nous avons 9000 particuliers. Et lorsqu'on parle de particuliers, il faut comprendre les salariés, les ménages, mais également des particuliers qui prennent des prêts pour, à titre personnel, mais pour contribuer à financer leurs projets dans le cadre des MPME, ainsi de suite. Donc, on a beaucoup d'entreprises, donc MPME, qui ont bénéficié de cette mesure-là. Next slide.
Kofi, time alert, 3 minutes, please.
OK. Next slide. Alors, au titre des mesures qui ont été prises pour l'innovation, nous avons, la BCAO a lancé la gratuité des services, les transactions de paiement, donc des petits montants, les paiements des factures inférieurs à 50 000. La BCAO a réduit également les frais applicables au paiement par carte bancaire, au virement, et également qui passent par la plateforme Msm Is. Donc, on a noté également l'assouplissement des conditions d'ouverture des comptes de monnaie électronique et le relèvement du plafond de rechargement. Et donc, toutes ces mesures ont permis d'avoir, pendant 3 mois, de mars 2020 à juin 2020, plus de 14 millions de nouveaux comptes qui ont été ouverts et des transactions qui ont dépassé les 2,5 milliards d'euros. Donc, nous voyons que ces mesures ont véritablement eu de l'impact dans notre zone. Next slide. D'une manière spécifique, en termes de financement des PME, nous sommes à une étape embryonnaire. Nous avons réfléchi à mettre en place un comité qui s'appelle comité FinTech. Et ce comité-là réfléchit à la mise en place d'un bureau d'innovation financière, également d'un laboratoire réglementaire qu'on appelle généralement le Regulatory Sandbox. Et ces mesures sont en train d'être mises en œuvre dans notre zone. Next slide, the last one. Et d'une manière générale, pour les mesures qui concernent les femmes et les jeunes, toutes ces mesures s'inscrivent en fait dans la stratégie régionale d'inclusion financière de la zone. Et cette stratégie-là vise à inclure notamment dans son axe 3 à promouvoir les innovations favorables à l'inclusion financière des populations exclues. Et lorsqu'on parle des populations exclues, on vise les petites entreprises, on vise les jeunes, on vise les femmes. Et donc, des mesures spécifiques sont en train d'être prises au titre de cette stratégie pour l'année 2022, par exemple. Il y a une étude qui est envisagée pour évaluer les besoins de ces petites entreprises, les entreprises dirigées par les femmes, les jeunes, pour pouvoir adresser au mieux donc, les besoins de ces entreprises. Voilà ce que je voulais partager. Donc, on note globalement que la zone a été également affectée par la pandémie, mais des mesures ont été prises très tôt, ce qui a permis de réduire l'impact de cette crise. Et la Banque centrale est en train de mettre en œuvre plusieurs stratégies, plusieurs réflexions pour pouvoir continuer à promouvoir le financement des PME. Je vous remercie et je vous repasse la parole, Alba.
Thank you very much, Kofi. Right on time. Very grateful for you to keep on time. I think I will turn to our MC. Do we have time to take a couple of questions? I don't see any questions in the chat. Tati, do we have time to take any questions?
We probably have 2 questions allowed, Aban, and there's one in the chat.
Perfect. So we do have a question from CF Bari, if I'm not wrong. The question is, I would like to ask about the impact of the procedures post COVID-19 policies. So I think the question is, what are the results or the outcomes from the policies that have been taken? What are the results that you're seeing? Maybe we can give a minute each to Alex, Dr. Emma, and Kofi to respond to this question on the outcomes and results from these measures. Alex, we can start with you. You need to unmute. I think your mic is on mute, Alex.
Like I said in my presentation, that when it came to the last quarter of 2020, there was some kind of recovery, especially from the manufacturing sector and the construction sector. And like you heard, when the government started injecting money in the medium and small enterprises, and it continued also to inject money, to put money available for the vulnerable groups like the youth and the women, they have already invested that money. The economy is now coming on its right path. There is some kind of recovery, and we anticipate that come the financial year 2022-2023, Uganda's economy will have recovered fully.
Thank you very much. Kofi, I see your camera is on, so maybe I go to you before I go to Dr. Emma. Over to you, Kofi.
Ok, merci beaucoup. En termes d'impact, comme je le disais dans la présentation, déjà, les mesures qui ont été prises ont permis de maintenir l'emploi dans les MPME. Beaucoup d'entreprises n'ont pas licencié leur personnel et ça a été carrément une mesure très, très, très importante. Mais surtout, la mesure de report d'échéance a eu beaucoup d'impact. Nous avons des chiffres qui sont en train d'être mis à jour ces derniers temps, mais nous voyons également que plusieurs entreprises ont bénéficié de ces mesures et ces mesures ont affecté plus de 12 000 entreprises en décembre 2020. Et donc, voilà, il y a des compilations qui sont également en train d'être faites actuellement pour mieux évaluer encore l'impact de ces mesures. Mais déjà, ce que je peux vous dire à ce stade. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Dr. Emma, maybe I would ask you to take a slightly different question connected to this. The question is, which is more resilient? Is it the MFIs or the banks for all these measures? What is your experience in Namibia?
I think maybe I just wanted, before I come to your question, I just wanted to touch slightly on the first question that was posed, sure, if you allow me.
Of course.
In our case, while we have seen recovery coming on slowly, we must actually also point out that in terms of the initiatives that have been introduced, the take-up has been very slow from the side of SMEs. So we are currently actually busy investigating as to what are the specific reasons. Why is the take-up slow? So that's one of the things that we have identified. So which is more resilient? I think it's more in our space, I think it's more the commercial banks rather than the MFIs, because we have received a lot of complaints coming from the MFI side, and such that they have actually, most of them also have actually gone out of business, have been driven out of business. So we are trying to work to resuscitate that sector as well going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Emma. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for this session. So let me thank all our panelists for so generously sharing their experiences. I hope all the participants found their inputs valuable for preparing for the MSME recovery in their own jurisdictions. So thank you very much for your attention, and to our distinguished panelists for giving us their time today. I hand back to you, Tati.
Thank you very much, Aban, for the great moderation of that technical session. It was very informative to hear the different experiences of our members from the different African countries.